Hello everyone, and welcome to this video where we are going to continue to give the Avala class vessel some loving. We're going to give it an update based on some of the comments I've seen, as well as some of the other factors that I've been noticing here in the game. As you may have noticed on my YouTube community page, I started posting things including a questionnaire. This one is awesome. Which organization do you prefer? And we're pretty much 50-50 split between OMA and Alta. I love that. That's exactly what I aspire to happen. I want it to be an even split. I don't need favorites, so that's perfect. Then I have an interesting questionnaire here for buckle vehicles. Obviously commercial are the most preferred, then service, then civilian. I will say that civilian vehicles have their place because I first developed them as civilian vehicles, then build them up into the other types. Then I gave a little bit of an update. Now here was an interesting thing. What would you like to be my focus for OMA? Update and modernize old vessels. 14% of 377 people said to update and modernize my old vessels. So I will do that. I will be updating the old Almeria class vessels, and I consider the Avala one of my legacy beautiful creations. I want to keep it updated and working well. Create new vessels. This is happening. Develop new tech. This will also happen. Land bases, I have that planned, and of course support vehicles at 11%. That is kind of a no-brainer for me. When I'm doing smaller things, I will create support vehicles when I can't just have large creations. Now this newest one, what would you like my focus to be for Alta? Of course, everyone, or 53% of 163 votes want me to expand into trains. So that has been on my mind for a while now. Mineral mining, support vessels and vehicles are evenly matched, and then oil facilities. So I will be doing those things. Thank you so much for participating, and I can't wait to kind of post more questionnaires and get more feedback. Quite interesting that the Avala was out in September of 2021. My goodness, it's been a while since then. Crazy, hey? But what is awesome, it has 15,000 subscribers, which is an awesome amount. I love that. And it's been a constant rock that I went back to as far as a vessel. I just find it so useful and so good. So I do want to make it fully functional and proper. There's been a lot of comments on my Discord server and on my YouTube videos, but here Boston 2010 actually wrote a very good point regarding the quick connect system, which we're going to get into, as well as something with the gantry crane. And as I do, I opened up the game and I was going to make those changes, and I wanted to test specifically how the quick connect system of the rib functions. But when I turned the vessel on, I was actually noticing that my electric motors were giving a bit of a throttle, and the ship, even in a standstill, was moving. So that is no good. You can't have a ship that has to be turned off in order for it to not move. Obviously we have to be able to have it idle. So I went into digging what on earth is going on, and you may notice now that this button here says disable electric hybrid mode rather than enable. So now by default it's always on electric hybrid mode, and you will notice if you turn off this mode and you give it full throttle, that middle propeller will not spin. So that middle propeller is now only connected to the electric motor, and actually I was able to get a little bit more speed out of it. So without the motors on, or electric system on at all, we're getting a nice steady 24 knots. Maybe if we raise the trim up, we'll get a little bit more, not. But regardless, 24 knots is pretty good for a vessel this size. Now we are riding at quite high RPMs here, or RPS, but regardless, this is a good top speed. Obviously, if you want to run it at top speed, it is going to waste more fuel. Maybe something around 88% is more recommended, and then of course your RPS drops down around 16, so now your range has increased significantly at a small loss of speed. But I'm all about speed, and I like when things go fast, so check that out. By turning off this button or enabling the hybrid mode, now we're making 29 knots even at 88. And what's really nice is the battery is draining. That's not nice, but what is nice is the system is automatically turning down the throttle to the motors, to the electric system, to make up for the fact that we're losing battery. And eventually it's going to hit a sweet spot. So you can put it at 100% throttle. Obviously then your RPM spikes up because we're moving too fast for our propellers to keep up. What's happening is the boost is actually speeding up what our engines are producing. So now we are riding a little bit higher on the RPMs, but not that high. We're not hitting that RPS of 20 max, and you could see that these are slowly dropping the throttle there. So this is now hitting 30 knots pretty steadily, which is great for a ship this size, I think, and it is pretty functional as it is. Of course, if you stop and you keep holding S, your propellers actually break the ship, so the little propellers will stop it, and that is a system that I added in afterwards as well. So hopefully this fixes a lot of the issues here with the RSV Avala. And then there's a couple more things. For a ship this size, having this many engines is not that absurd. Like, there's 5 engines in here. I actually did try a version that had 2 more engines on either side, and yeah, you get a little bit more extra speed, and that may come out here soon or later, sooner rather than later, or who knows. But the point is, I tried to make it optimal as far as this configuration goes. Now, it is a pretty big vessel, so that amount of motors can definitely use a little bit of a boost. And if we go here into the back of the ship, into the rear ballast tank, you could see here we have the motor on this small propeller on either side. Those are fully the electric motors, and now we've put this massive one here on this propeller. That actually got us up to speed. So any of you watching that need an advice, there is a very, very fine balance of how many propellers you can put for how many motors. So at first I had these 3 motors, or these 3 propellers, attached directly to the 5 motors plus this battery or motor, and people reporting the engines were stalling out, they weren't working properly, because the motors were actually, or the engines were powering this motor, because I didn't have it on a clutch, and they were sucking up the power and all kinds of things. So I found that having it on a separate circuit is way steadier and more balanced. So of course, like I said, from the ground up, I rebuilt this controller, and I currently don't employ it in any of my other ships other than the Avala class vessel, for the reason that it was unstable. But now, having figured this out, I may implement it in some of my other ships to get us a little bit more of a power boost, because of course, as the battery drains, the power input or the power output onto these electric motors reduces. So really, you shouldn't end up draining your battery fully, and there's even a cutoff. Like, you could end up, that's the one thing I built into it, I could say electric motor cuts off when it reaches 0.4, so that's when it stops. Also, when it reaches 0.75, it actually goes only to 27%. That could be 0 if I wanted to, so I could actually adjust when it cuts off entirely, so it only gives us a little bit of a speed boost if and when needed and when charged up with batteries. So that was a really good thing to do, and I'm quite happy with that result. So the next thing is this rib. Now, as I said, or as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I do love the idea of the hardpoint connector. I really do. I love the fact that the hardpoint can spawn right inside it. So like, you can actually have it spawn into it and have it, I mean, not when you're placing like that, but the point is, it's a very nice system. You don't have to wait for the thing to drop, and if it's in heavy seas, it may flop around and stuff. But the problem with it is that it is very, very fine. You have to get it almost perfectly into there in order for it to work. So I went back to the cradle style system here with these electric connectors. I just find they work so much better with the application like this. And I will be doing the same for the Adria as well. So that was a great observation. In this case, I also put the track, so we have only the rear connectors attaching themselves to the vessel, so you could actually put it in either direction. Previously, you had to always park it in the same direction, but I thought with the tracks now, this is the perfect opportunity to make you be able to perfectly park it right dead center, and the tracks connected and prevents it from flopping all over the place. So yeah, it's a bit bigger of a cradle, but overall it works much, much better this way. So let's dive into the Adria here. I did copy over my cradle because I do like how I made that, so I'm just going to paste it here for now. And then we'll drag this rib up. Of course, it's a special rib. It actually has a fire hose in it, so it is intended to be more of a rescue style rib than the other one, which is more sort of for, call it, exploration. We're just going to drag this up a bit, and of course removing these hardpoint connectors. Like I said, I really tried to use them as much as possible, and I really do like the hardpoint connectors, but when it requires it to be such a fine and precise connection, which is honestly very hard to get, especially if you're in some kind of like storm or rough seas, it's going to be very difficult for you to pair up your hardpoint connector to your rib. I really don't think that that's a long-term capable system. It works in several applications, such as the akimbo, where you actually have a winch raising up the rib and positioning it in place. But in this case, where you actually have to drive it into place, I think this is the much better solution here. So I'm just going to drag this over now into that. And once that's in place, we can of course pair it up and make sure to connect the electric. Now, one of the biggest failures of my Avala class vessel is the electrics. I'm driven absolutely mad by the fact that I did it this spiderweb style method. It makes any retrofits and revisions so much harder. Previously, well, in all my new ships, you know, you delete this light, you're still good to go. Here, that light is feeding a bunch of other stuff, and it's a mess to dig. So remember, I gave him this advice before, I'll give it again. Do not do the spiderweb style connector. You will always end up disappointed, and any retrofits you want to make will be greatly hampered by that decision. So positioning that in its cradle now and on the track, there we have it. So that is a beautiful little solution. I really do like it, and even the walls on the side should really help us drive into this cradle and end up having a system that works much better. So that is great. And then of course in the front of the ship here we have this microcontroller. This is V1.1. So I'm just going to go ahead and put our 1.2 system. This 1.2 system is much preferred. Now of course that may have changed the button. I just have to make sure that I think 1.1 did already account for the enable. Yeah, disable. So that is correct. Disable electric mode is good. This is fine. And the next thing and or last thing is to split this up, because we now said that this is not the system we want. This is exactly why my engines were stalling out, because this isn't the optimal way to run it. So what I will do is of course just make everything symmetrical and then go ahead and delete this over here. Now we can just take this motor and position it right over top of that propeller, and that's going to be now nicely attached to there. So that works. And what I did is in effect I tried to add propellers in my latest revision to actually see if I can't make the by putting a little bit of extra required power. So by adding extra propellers, the engines were more utilized, but then the electric battery or electric power was actually facilitating it. But what I found is that with that, it would actually adding those extra propellers would make it run properly, but then at the expense of it would stall out if you turn anything, if you put up any lower than what is required. Now again, this is a massive motor, so normally we had these guys here. This is a big one, and it may be worthwhile for me to play around with and experiment with putting the smaller one. It'll probably reduce the battery or reduce the consumption a bit. But again, the way that I run the need for having this top speed or hybrid mode is to boost out as much power as possible at the expense of a lot of things, including fuel, including heat, so or like engine temperature. So if you are running the hybrid mode, you'll definitely need to be a little smart with it and turn it on if and when you need that full speed. Otherwise, play around with that fine balance and get to a point where it's not really running the show, it's just facilitating and helping. Now let's try this out. If I load it up and jump into the helm or bridge here. Okay, so motor started up nicely. You can see here that electric motor throttle is 0. Now as I press W now, you can see this goes all the way up to 100, and then it starts to drop based on where we are currently at. Now, one thing that is interesting is that we are redlining very hard here, and the reason for that actually is because in adjusting my last update, I actually set the ratio to be 1:1, which really does not help the RPS issue. So now we should be much more stable. And again, first things first, I do want to test out how it works with just the regular propellers. So now the middle one should not spin. So we just have our external ones spinning, and actually we are getting a high RPS and a high top speed. Now that's because the Adria is a much smaller vessel. It's lighter than the Avala, even though it's the same class. So of course you can expect that that will cause, you know, it to go a little faster. So it does get up to a higher RPS, around 18. It's not awful, but now if we disable this, so that turns on to 100%, we've gone up to 37 knots, which is awesome. That's very good. Very good indeed. But now we are hitting 19.7 RPS, so we're just bouncing around 19.6 or thereabouts. So again, with this idea, it's to run the ship very hard when you have to get to a certain place. You're really pushing the ship. And I sort of added something here. I actually made a high gear button, so if you throw it into high gear, even at full power and with the enabled hybrid mode, you're getting around 32 knots, so it's a little more steady at a lower RPM. Of course, if you throw off high gear, you can get higher speeds, of course, at the detriment of your RPM. And if you turn this off while it's in high gear, your RPS drops pretty much to an okay area, and you can actually ride like this at 18.5. You're getting a speed of almost 30 knots. That's not bad. Of course, if you turn on high gear now, your speed will drop. You're going 25 knots, but so does your RPS, and your range extends drastically, so you can save fuel. So high gear in this case is an option to help you out and make sure that you can optimize your vehicle and use it in the proper way, whether it is to push out every little bit of speed or whether it's to have a more efficient and long sort of traveling vessel. So thank you all for watching. Stay tuned for these updates. I can't wait to do more, and as always, happy Stormworksing everyone.